Hello and welcome to today's recording of a live reading of Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. Let me adjust my microphone. For those of you who are not in the stream today, sucks, but hi. We just went over some tenets of what this book is about a little bit, not very, very much, although we'll be getting into reading the foreword and the preface of the book today, so that'll give you a sense as well. And we also talked a bit about who Paulo Freire is. As a brief summary, Paulo Freire was a Brazilian educator and an extremely influential radical thinker who had a critical construction, deconstruction, analysis of his role as an educator and the role of education in changing the world in revolution. And as folks who are interested in changing the world, whether you're somebody who doesn't consider themselves left-wing at all, considers themselves maybe kind of right-leaning or centrist, but a little bit disillusioned with everything. If you consider yourself center-left, you're recognizing now that maybe the Democratic Party in the United States or mainstream liberal parties in other countries like in Canada or France are not quite doing what they're supposed to be doing in terms of actually helping people who are in need of help, the poor, the oppressed. If you are a newfound radical, somebody who is really interested in radical left-wing politics, maybe situations in Gaza or in Sudan have opened your eyes in recent months, maybe ongoing situations in your own country, maybe the rise of Trump, maybe the rise of Biden, especially in this final form. Maybe all of these different things have led you down this path where maybe you're watching Hasanabi videos, maybe you're watching Hasanabi live streams, I should say. He makes videos, but the videos are cuts of live streams. You know what I mean? Maybe you're watching Hasanabi, maybe you're watching video essays by FD Signifier and ContraPoints and Philosophy Tube. Maybe you're talking to friends about how capitalism is bad, but you don't have much of a literary background. Like you haven't really read much in terms of books about these topics, about capitalism, about oppression, about revolution. Maybe you're somebody who is extremely Marxist-Leninist and who is Marxist-Leninist in the sort of mainstream connotation of that term in terms of believing in revolutionary programs akin to that of the early formation of the Soviet Union and its revolution. Maybe you're a third world Maoist. Maybe you're somebody who's quite right-wing and just thinks that this is all a bunch of gobbledygook. Maybe you're one of the people who listen to James Lindsay's podcast about how Paulo Freire is basically an evil figure who spread Marxism and that's a bad thing. Whoever you are, I think we can all agree that the world is bad in the state that it's in. Not bad in terms of like life is bad, like living in life in general as a general idea is bad, but like things are going badly. There is a great amount of war and chaos and oppression in the world. There is a tremendous amount of devastation and tragedy that seems to be unending, and nobody in positions of power seems to be doing anything about it. And you have some interest in trying to make the world a better place. Whatever the case might be, I highly recommend this book, and I'm really excited to be reading it for you and with you today. And at points, I'll also be engaging with folks in the chat, giving asides, giving my thoughts on the book as I read it. And feel free to leave comments on the live stream that is uploaded to the Reading with Elliot channel, this channel, to let me know what you think, how you're feeling, what you'd like me to read after we eventually read this book. It's 181 pages, which is a lot, but also not that much. So I would love to be doing this in more cases in the future with more books. And also let me know how your day's going. That being said, today we are, like I said, going to read the foreword and the introduction. Not the introduction, the preface. There's an introduction on this, so let me show you the copy that I got in front of me. There's an introduction here by Donaldo Macedo, I believe. And then there is this foreword. And let me just look at the table of contents to show you the reality, to not talk out of my ass here. Yeah, the foreword is by someone named Richard Shaw. I don't know who these folks are, but they seem cool. And the foreword is going to give you a bit of a rundown about Paulo Freire and about the book. And then we're going to be reading the preface. Both of these are fairly short. One is 6 pages, one is 8. And so a good deal of this is also going to be me talking through this and getting a feel for how this is going to go. And then next we'll do chapter 1 in the next live stream, I think. Okay, I've done a lot of preamble. I've done a lot of talking. We should get to it, shouldn't we? Starting with the foreword. Put the chat on screen. There you go. Chat's on screen. Chat's on screen. I was talking to myself there. I should also put the Ko-Fi button on here. Yeah, I have a Ko-Fi button here too. What's the best place to put this? Maybe I should put my face here and put the Ko-Fi here. Is that disorienting? Let me know, folks. Okay, y'all ready? Y'all excited? Everybody make some noise. I'm just checking out the chat really quickly. What's on the ceiling looks very cool. I have this LED light back here that I always use for shooting videos. Aquí una body emociona para escuchar. Emocionada para escuchar. Yo también. Yo me siento un ching emocionado para leer este libro, este texto. Sorry, my Spanish can be really bad sometimes. Estoy bien. Siento una gran apreciación. Una gran apreciación. Let me stop. Let me stop trying to speak Spanish right now. I'm not in my Spanish brain right now. I'm in my reading brain. Here we go. Over the years, the thought and work of the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire have spread from the northeast of Brazil to an entire continent and have made a profound impact not only in the field of education, but also in the overall struggle for national development. At the precise moment when the disinherited masses in Latin America are awakening from their traditional lethargy and are anxious to participate as subjects in the development of their countries, Paulo Freire has perfected a method for teaching illiterates that has contributed in an extraordinary way to that process. You can tell the writing's a bit antiquated from the use of the word illiterates in this way. But yes, this is part of what Paulo Freire did. He taught literacy to many people in poor villages in Brazil. In fact, those who, in learning to read and write, come to a new awareness of selfhood and begin to look critically at the social situation in which they find themselves, often take the initiative in acting to transform the society that has denied them this opportunity of participation. Education is once again a subversive force. In this country, we are gradually becoming aware of the work of Paulo Freire, but thus far we have thought of it primarily in terms of its contribution to the education of illiterate adults in the Third World. If, however, we take a closer look, we may discover that his methodology as well as his educational philosophy are as important for us as for the dispossessed in Latin America. Their struggle to become free subjects and to participate in the transformation of their society is similar in many ways to the struggle not only of Blacks and Mexican Americans, but also of middle-class young people in this country. And the sharpness and intensity of that struggle in the developing world may well provide us with new insight, new models, and a new hope as we face our own situation. For this reason, I consider the publication of Pedagogy of the Oppressed and in an English edition to be something of an event. Also, before I read the next paragraph, want to note to keep this term in mind, subjects. And if you have any interest in like existentialism at all and like the subject and the object, keep that sort of concept in mind as you read this book. It's quite important to the book. Okay, back to reading. Paulo Freire's thought represents the response of a creative mind and sensitive conscience to the extraordinary misery and suffering of the oppressed around him. Born in 1921 in Recife, the center of one of the most extreme situations of poverty and underdevelopment in the Third World, he was soon forced to experience that reality directly. As the economic crisis in 1929 in the United States began to affect Brazil, the precarious stability of Freire's middle-class family gave way, and he found himself sharing the plight of the wretched of the earth. This is, of course, a term that we know famously from Frantz Fanon. This had a profound influence on his life as he came to know the gnawing pangs of hunger and fell behind in school because of the listlessness it produced. It also led him to make a vow at age 11 to dedicate his life to the struggle against hunger, so that other children would not have to know the agony he was then experiencing. His early sharing of the life of the poor also led him to the discovery of what he describes as the culture of silence of the dispossessed. He came to realize that their ignorance and lethargy were the direct product of the whole situation of economic, social, and political domination, and of the paternalism of which they were victims. Rather than being encouraged and equipped to know and respond to the concrete realities of their world, they were kept submerged in a situation in which such critical awareness and response were practically impossible. And it became clear to him that the whole educational system was one of the major instruments for the maintenance of this culture of silence. Confronted by this problem in a very existential way, Freire turned his attention to the field of education and began to work on it. Over the years, he has engaged in a process of study and reflection that has produced something quite new and creative in educational philosophy. From a situation of direct engagement in the struggle to liberate men and women for the creation of a new world, he has reached out to the thought and experience of those in many different situations and of diverse philosophical positions. In his words, to Sartre and Mounier, Eric Fromm and Louis Althusser, Ortega y Gasset and Mao, Martin Luther King and Che Guevara, Unamuno and Marcuse. He has made use of the insights of these men to develop a perspective on education which is authentically his own and which seeks to respond to the concrete realities of Latin America. His thought on the philosophy of education was first expressed in 1959 in his doctoral dissertation at the University of Recife, and later in his work as professor of the history and philosophy of education in the same university, as well as in his early experiments with the teaching of illiterates in that same city. The methodology he developed was widely used by Catholics and others in literacy campaigns throughout the northeast of Brazil. Let me fix the chat a little bit. And was considered such a threat to the old order that Freire was jailed immediately after the military coup in 1964. Released 70 days later and encouraged to leave the country, Freire went to Chile, where he spent 5 years working with UNESCO and the Chilean Institute for Agrarian Reform in programs of adult education. He then acted as a consultant at Harvard University's School of Education and worked in close association with a number of groups engaged in new educational experiments in rural and urban areas. He is presently serving as special consultant to the Office of Education of the World Council of Churches in Geneva. Freire has written many articles in Portuguese and Spanish, and his first book, Educação como Prática de Liberdade, was published in Brazil in 1964. His latest and most complete work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is the first of his writings to be published in this country. In this brief introduction, there is no point in attempting to sum up. Let me move my thingy here. I'm all over the place today. I'm in every part of the screen. Sorry, y'all. Also, let me check the chat really quickly before I get to that paragraph, because I want to make sure everything's good. Tu español es bueno. Muchas gracias. Qué lindo escucharte hablar español. Okay, I see what's going on. Ninguno problema, hermano. Muchas gracias. Okay. Back to the book. In this brief introduction, there is no point in attempting to sum up in a few paragraphs what the author develops in a number of pages. That would be an offense to the richness, depth, and complexity of his thought. But perhaps a word of witness has its place here, a personal witness as to why I find a dialogue with the thought of Paulo Freire an exciting adventure. Fed up as I am with the abstractness and sterility of so much intellectual work in academic circles today, I am excited by a process of reflection which is set in a thoroughly historical context, which is carried on in the midst of a struggle to create a new social order, and thus represents a new unity of theory and praxis. A couple things here I want to note as the reader. I really think that this point of the thoroughly historical context is something that is really important. It's something that I think you can see a clear connection with in terms of the Marxist idea of dialectical historical materialism, understanding the historical context that leads to people's actions, that leads to people's behaviors and thoughts, and how to act within these historical contexts, right? It's the idea that men make their history but not as they please. And I think that that's a really cool kind of insight into part of why a book like this is so important and so much more concrete, so much more available to our actual lives than a lot of other shit. Sorry, I cuss a little. Let me know if you don't want me to cuss in the comments. Also, this term praxis, very important. Muy importante. Bien importante. And I am encouraged when a man of the stature of Paulo Freire incarnates a rediscovery of the humanizing vocation of the intellectual and demonstrates the power of thought to negate accepted limits and open the way to a new future. Freire is able to do this because he operates on one basic assumption, that man's ontological vocation, as he calls it, is to be a subject who acts upon and transforms his world, and in so doing, moves toward ever new possibilities of fuller and richer life individually and collectively. This world to which he relates is not a static and closed order, a given reality which man must accept and to which he must adjust. Rather, it is a problem to be worked on and solved. It is the material used by man to create history, a task which he performs as he overcomes that which is dehumanizing at any particular time and place, and dares to create the qualitatively new. For Freire, the resources for that task at the present time are provided by the advanced technology of our Western world. But the social vision which impels us to negate the present order and demonstrate that history has not ended comes primarily from the suffering and struggle of the people of the Third World. Coupled with this is Freire's conviction, now supported by a wide background of experience, that every human being, no matter how ignorant or submerged in the culture of silence he or she may be, is capable of looking critically at the world in a dialogical encounter with others. Provided with the proper tools for such encounter, the individual can gradually perceive personal and social reality as well as the contradictions in it, become conscious of his or her own perception of that reality, and deal critically with it. In this process, the old paternalistic teacher-student relationship is overcome. A peasant can facilitate this process for a neighbor more effectively than a teacher brought in from outside. People educate each other through the mediation of the world. A little water. Thanks, Julian. As this happens, the word takes on new power. It is no longer an abstraction or magic, but a means by which people discover themselves and their potential, as they give names to things around them. As Freire puts it, each individual wins back the right to say his or her own word, to name the world. When an illiterate peasant participates in this sort of educational experience, he or she comes to a new awareness of self, has a new sense of dignity, and is stirred by a new hope. Time and time again, peasants have expressed these discoveries in striking ways after a few hours of class. I now realize I am a person, an educated person. We were blind. Now our eyes have been opened. Before this, words meant nothing to me. Now they speak to me, and I can make them speak. Now we will no longer be a dead weight on the cooperative farm. When this happens in the process of learning to read, men and women discover that they are creators of culture, and that all their work can be creative. I work, and working, I transform the world. And as those who have been completely marginalized are so radically transformed, they are no longer willing to be mere objects, responding to changes occurring around them. They are more likely to decide to take upon themselves the struggle to change the structures of society, which until now have served to oppress them. For this reason, a distinguished Brazilian student of national development recently affirmed that this type of educational work among the people represents a new factor in social change and development, a new instrument of conduct for the third world by which it can overcome traditional structures and enter the modern world. Excuse me. Sorry. At first sight, Paulo Freire's method of teaching illiterates in Latin America seems to belong to a different world from that in which we find ourselves in this country. Certainly, it would be absurd to claim that it should be copied here. But there are certain parallels in the two situations that should not be overlooked. Our advanced technological society is rapidly making objects of most of us and subtly programming us into conformity to the logic of its system. To the degree that this happens, we are also becoming submerged in a new culture of silence. The paradox is that the same technology that does this to us also creates a new sensitivity to what is happening. Especially among young people, the new media, together with the erosion of old concepts of authority, open the way to acute awareness of this new bondage. The young perceive that their right to say their own word has been stolen from them, and that few things are more important than the struggle to win it back. And they also realize that the educational system today, from kindergarten to university, is their enemy. There is no such thing as a neutral educational process. Education either functions as an instrument that is used to facilitate the integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity to it, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. The development of an educational methodology that facilitates this process will inevitably lead to tension and conflict within our society. But it could also contribute to the formation of a new man and mark the beginning of a new era in Western history. For those who are committed to that task and are searching for concepts and tools for experimentation, Paulo Freire's thought will make a significant contribution in the years ahead. And that's the foreword by Richard Schwall, who, again, I don't know who that is. Let me know if y'all are feeling it, and if there's any, if you're having any issues or thoughts about the stream. Why are you reading Paulo Freire exactly? I draw a lot from Paulo Freire. I love the book a lot. And I think that it speaks to so many insights that I think are really useful, that I think we really could benefit from drawing a lot from. Not only in terms of helping others, but helping ourselves. Not only in terms of avoiding pitfalls of, progress, of changing yourself. like trying to seize a type of control over other people's thought, or trying to settle on a type of static vision of reality. It really helps people to think dialectically, to think in ways that are based in motion, right? The only thing that's certain is change, right? And to think dialectically, to me, is kind of like saying to think in terms of motion and to recognize things as things that are situated in motion, things that are situated based on their relation to other things that are alike or different from it, and that are caused by context, right? It teaches us to know how to think critically, to know how to have critical consciousness, to develop critical consciousness, and to educate ourselves in a better way. So, big fan. Why is this exactly what I needed right now? I think it's always what I need. Like, especially when I'm in periods of time when I'm like really trying to think about my life and reflect and trying to be better at the work I do. It's like, this is the book. I just crack it open to any page and I can draw something from it. Hi, Deny. Yeah, I'm going to put it on a separate channel, this recording, afterwards. So be ready. I'm glad that I'm seeing so much excitement. Come to Brazil. I would love to one day go to Brazil. Here in Brazil, Freire is easy to topic for crazy reactionaries. There's like a lot of reactionary responses to Freire that construe him as like this person who endangers children with Marxist evilness and stuff like that. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much I should benefit like that kind of critique, because it's like, it's not like it's based on specific things that you can say he really said. It doesn't come off like fair. You know what I mean? It comes off to me as like clearly quite unfair. And if you read the book, you'll see what I mean. I mean, I don't know how much of this book you can never look at and be like, oh, that's a hot take. Like, that's super controversial what he just said. Like, a lot of it is really like, I mean, at the time, perhaps it could have been seen more so like that. But now you read it and it's like, it is very activating. It is very changing. It is very clarifying. But it never comes off to me as like standoffish. It's not anti-militant, but it doesn't seem militant either to me in a particularly like forceful way. So yeah. Where's the second channel? It's called Reading with Elliot. I'll be posting it in my community posts when I post these live streams on that channel. I'll share them on my community posts, so you'll see them on my channel here as well. Like, you'll see them in the community posts. I'll have like links to them. Sorry, that takes a while to explain. If you could summarize / comment on key parts as you read, that could be helpful. Yeah, I'll try my best to do that. And I'll try my best to like, it's just a matter of whether I feel like I'm up to it, I mean, there's so many things too that I could draw from and say like, this is it. This is a huge passage. And at a certain point, it'd be like, dude, we're never going to read the book. So I'm going to try to strike that balance. I'm also going to turn my mic up just slightly. I don't want to break anybody's earphones, but I also felt like I came in a little bit quiet. For those watching, sorry that the audio is a little bit different in the video. Yeah, I think there's a ton of amazing art and writing from Brazil that needs to be taken serious. I'm also really interested in reading Milton Santos. And even a lot of the stuff that's considered like kind of cheesy or cheap or, that's degraded, stuff from like the favela and stuff like that, musical forms like that, is shit that I really like. So I feel like there's so much you can draw from these things. Like, Brazil is just one of the most fascinating countries. I mean, every country is one of the most fascinating countries, but how could people not be interested in Brazil? It's a gigantic country in Latin America with an extremely singular, unique history. It's very kind of disconnected with and yet connected to the rest of Latin America. It's centered to some of the most important political events of the 21st century. It's like the home of soccer. You know what I mean? Like, there's just a lot going on in Brazil. And so it's I do think I find a lot of frustration. I feel a lot of frustration. I share a lot of frustration with the emphasis on reading strictly Western white guy thinkers, folks from Europe and America. I try to caution people away from outright dismissing a lot of that stuff because, for instance, there's a ton of stuff you can get from Marx, right? Marx is like my favorite thinker, maybe. And another person who's obviously quite misunderstood, and that's a whole other topic that could go on forever. But at the same time, like, I would love to make an emphasis in this channel to read authors that are from Latin America, that are from also, or writing about Latin America, Asia, Africa, and from marginalized communities within the entire world, including in the U.S., etc. So, yeah. Last point, Leonardo says Brazil tends to be really dismissive with its own history, and I think that that's a really fascinating point because as a Dominican and as a person who, of course, like, I live in New York, my family's from DR, I know a lot of Latinos, Latinxes, right? I know a lot of Hispanic folk, like Latin American folk, and that seems to be like a shared thing. You know, it's very rare that you see, aside from maybe like Mexico and Chile to a degree, right? Like for the both of them, it's still kind of there. There's the sentiment of like our own stuff is not as good as the other stuff. Our own history is not as interesting. And I think maybe that could be seen in like most countries. It's certainly not something that people think about in America. In America, people just think American history, first of all, is what you get taught in textbooks, which is not true. But also that American history is like the only history. And while it's crucial to study American history and all that, and to study America, the United States of America, not America. I mean, it's important to study the American continents. But yeah, anyway, it's important to know about the U.S., but we have this American exceptionalism thing where it's like the only thing it's important to know about is like American writers. And that's how you get some of the rancid takes you see on Twitter. And I'm back to the book. We're going to read the preface now, which is written by Paulo Freire. It is his preface to this book. The book has 4 chapters after this. And so this preface is quite crucial, quite fascinating, and really highlights some of the important things. There's an argument you can make that if you're going to read anything in this book to just get a vibe for it, like get a feel, like the preface is probably that part of the book. So I would say read the full book, and there's probably more important stuff in chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, especially considering what you think and where you are at and what you need to know. But the preface definitely hits on some of the key points. But also it does some key theoretical contextualizing for the rest of the book. So we'll talk about it as I read. 33 minutes in. Woo. I'm going to take a quick second to just make sure that I have space on my computer to save this live stream, because I have a lot of big ass stuff on this computer. I'm going to have to delete some stuff. I have a lot of big ass files on this computer. Deny knows exactly what I'm talking about. Speaking of Deny, L Literacy's here too. What's up, L? Good to see me spreading knowledge. Thank you. Okay, yeah, it's interesting to hear that that's the case in Chile too. Yeah, that's colonialism for you. That's colonization for you. Oh, hold on a second. I don't like this frame rate. No, wait, hold on a second. I don't like this frame rate, guys. I don't like this frame rate. Boop. Boop. There we go. We're back. Good frame rate. Here we go. Preface. One more sip. These pages, which introduce pedagogy of the oppressed, result from my observations during 6 years of political exile, observations which have enriched those previously afforded by my educational activities in Brazil. I have encountered, both in training courses which analyze the role of conscientisation and in actual experimentation with a truly liberating education, the fear of freedom discussed in the first chapter of this book. Now, one thing I'm going to do also, since we've got a live stream chat and since folks want the analysis, I will read the notes. So there's a note next to conscientisation, and it says the term conscientisation refers to learning to perceive social, political, and economic contradictions and to take action against the oppressive elements of reality. I feel like you could say that this term in English would be like consciousness, but it would be more like conscientization, like the becoming conscientious, right? Conscientization. So there's that. Not infrequently, training course participants call attention to the danger of conscientisation in a way that reveals their own fear of freedom. Critical consciousness, they say, is anarchic. Others add that critical consciousness may lead to disorder. Some, however, confess, "Why deny it? I was afraid of freedom. I am no longer afraid." So this kind of like, there's a lot of stuff in this book that will come off to you as like kind of par for the course. Like, especially when you're not reading it with like a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of focus. This book can fall into the category that a lot of leftist books can fall into, where it feels like a person's just saying like, and freedom is good and revolution is good. And that's why we have to have freedom and revolution. But revolution can only be revolution if it's free. And then like, the only way to truly be free is to be revolutionary. But why didn't I want to be free? Because I was scared to be a revolutionary. You know what I mean? Like, there's stuff that you can read that way. But the more that you read this book and the more open you are to it, the more you realize like how powerful this is. It gets at a key thing that I think is important to understanding about other people. And this frustration we have that other people are ignorant, other people are dumb, other people ruin the world. There's no way that we can fix the world because people are bad, right? I think this is a great book as a kind of response to that line of thinking, which is a valid line of thinking. But a line like this says, essentially, people are doing things out of fear. And this is something I come back to a lot in my own thinking that I think I get from Freire, really. The reason people think bad things is because they're scared. They have very valid fears deep down about the way others will treat them, about their economic situation, about their safety, about their health. So people will have, for instance, homophobic thoughts. People will have homophobic ideas. And you could clearly break down the logic of them and tell them, hey, that doesn't make sense. But a lot of the time, the person will hold on to those thoughts and you'll say, why? I could just break down to this person over and over again why the thing that they're thinking is wrong, why it doesn't make sense, and why it's hateful and why it harms people, and they don't seem to care. And that's a valid thing to feel. But at the same time, if you want to know why, it's because the person is scared. And there's a lot of different flavors of scared. But ultimately, those fears can kind of come down to, how will I be treated if I don't think this way? Who will I become if I don't think this way? And I think that that's a really important kind of thing that I draw from in this book. A lot of the time, colonial mindset is a good term. That I think you guys were kind of referring to, talking about like the Latin American stuff with that. But I noticed somebody said colonial mindset in the chat. Al Literacy says, Audre Lorde has a great book, Your Silence Will Not Protect You, where she talks about how fear is used as a tool to keep people silent. I feel like it's relevant here. That sounds, about like a relevant kind of piece to that, right? Thank you, Gideon. So key thing. In one of these discussions, the group was debating whether the conscientisation of men and women to a specific situation of injustice might not lead them to destructive fanaticism or to a sensation of total collapse of their world. In the midst of the argument, a person who previously had been a factory worker for many years spoke out. This is such a key quote. This is such an important part of the book. I think about this subconsciously, at least, every time I think about this book. Perhaps I am the only one here of working class origin. I can't say that I've understood everything you've said just now, but I can say one thing. When I began this course, I was naive. And when I found out how naive I was, I started to get critical. But this discovery hasn't made me a fanatic, and I don't feel any collapse either. I could read that quote over and over again. It's so real. It's so heavy. It's so important. And there's a danger in reading a passage like that and doing the like fetishizing the working class thing and being like, it took the working class person from that background. They had the key insight that ultimately this is freedom, that kind of thing, right? There's multiple things that's really important here. First, it's this sentence. I can't say that I've understood everything you've said just now, but I can say one thing. When I began this course, I was naive. And when I found out how naive I was, I started to get critical. And that is a key thing that we need to experience every day. Every day. Even in small doses, because some days you're not trying to learn anything. You're trying to go out and play basketball and drink and have fun with your friends. But every day you should be challenging the naivety that you see in yourself. And when I talk about fear, this is one of the big things people fear. They fear confronting the fact that they are naive. Because if they're naive and they've been standing on business about their ideas and their thoughts the whole time that they've been alive, you can't live with the guilt sometimes. You can't deal with the shame of realizing I've been acting like I know all this shit and I don't. And I've hurt people because of it. I have people that trust me based on things that I've said. And I'm just realizing that it's naive. Or I know subconsciously that it's naive, but I can't let myself know it. I have to program my brain. I have to tell the brain will do whatever you tell it to do. And so when you see a person say, I was naive, and when I was naive, I decided to get critical. That is maybe the sentence that describes the whole the whole thing of the book, which doesn't mean this is the only thing you need to read and the rest of the book is done. But it means as you struggle with all these different sort of points and different articulations he gets into, know that this is kind of the basis. As this idea. It is the choice to get critical. And what does critical mean, right? And we're going to get into that in multiple periods in this book. But to be critical means to examine things for their potential flaws. To examine things for their potential downsides, for their potential ways that they can bite you in the ass. As well as for the potential ways in which they can be good, right? To think critically about your food is to go, is this food really good? Do I really enjoy this food? Is it good for me? Why am I more and more frustrated by my hair every time I touch it? It's time to just tie my hair. This is a thing we do, right? We say, I'm naive about this. And in our head, we know that we're naive about it. And we don't do anything. We either pretend that we're not naive, or we simply just accept that we're naive and that there's no point. But when you think critically, there is a point. It leads you to getting things better. When you ask, do I really like this food? Is this food really good? It forces you to start thinking about whether or not you should keep eating the same amount of food. Whether or not you should keep eating the food that you're eating. Oh, thank you so much for the donation. 20 CAD. It's like, bro, driving on this road is scary enough without seeing all these potholes you're pointing out. I've been avoiding crashing without thinking of those. I'm going to keep driving without looking down. I think that's a great point, Grease. I think that's a really good metaphor. Like, let me just, to avoid the fear and to avoid the challenge and to avoid the reality of my situation, I'm going to pretend it's not there. And we all do that. And sometimes, like, it's even necessary. There's so many things that we're just not going to get to in time in our lives. So many things we're just not going to deconstruct well enough in time. So many things we're just going to hold on to. But this will lead us to the suffering that is dehumanization. And we have to be conscious of that. And then this discovery hasn't made me a fanatic, and I don't feel any collapse either. How powerful is that? You know, just to speak to this idea of what we fear in confronting our ideas and what we fear in thinking critically and trying to change. What these people fear when they hold on to these transphobic, homophobic, racist beliefs, when they hold on to these terrible ways of life, is the idea that everything will collapse if they confront it. And if you know anything about living, you'll know that, like, the longer you put off something that really needs to happen by saying, everything will just go bad if I do it, so I just might as well just keep going. 9 out of 10 times, that's just going to make it worse and worse. I'll move on, but there's just so much there with that quote. I love it so much. Doubt regarding the possible effects of conscientisation implies a premise which the doubter does not always make explicit. It is better for the victims of injustice not to recognize themselves as such. In fact, however, conscientisation does not lead people to destructive fanaticism. On the contrary, by making it possible for people to enter the historical process as responsible subjects, conscientisation enrolls them in the search for self-affirmation and thus avoids fanaticism. And let's get to that note. The term subjects denotes those who know and act, in contrast to objects, which are known and acted upon. And like I said, if you're familiar a bit with existentialism and the idea of, like, the subject and the object, you know, even if if you're familiar with the idea of, like, main character syndrome, it's like a person who only can perceive themselves as a subject, right? Who only subjectifies themselves and refuses to see themselves as an object in a lot of ways, right? Refuses to see themselves as something that can be acted upon. And so there has to be a dialectic between the two, especially because there is no subject without the object, no object without the subject. But a lot of what Freire is saying in terms of what it means to be critically conscious and what it means to liberate oneself is to recognize that you are a subject in the historical process. You are a subject in politics. You know, you have a say, you have things that you can do. You have an effect on people. It is very dangerous to believe that you don't have an effect on people. You know, on a personal level, there are people that I have known that don't think that they have any effect on people, right? That just think, I'm just some little guy, right? I don't really do anything. And those people are, like, often just hurting people over and over again and don't recognize it, right? I'll never be happy with my hair. I'm just doing the most right now. This is what I do every stream, by the way. I'm gonna get my buzz cut back one of these days and be happy again. But for now, long hair. Let me check the chat really quickly. I loved your video on third places. Thank you, T. Thank you so much, April. I'm glad that you're learning so much. I'm just a little guy. I'm gonna pin that. I'm just a little guy, right? Oh, I'm just a little guy. Like, I just don't hurt anybody, you know? So the quote: "The awakening of critical consciousness leads the way to the expression of social discontents, precisely because these discontents are real components of an oppressive situation." And the note here, this is from Francisco Weffert in the preface to Paulo Freire, Educação como Prática da Liberdade. Feel free to critique my Portuguese in the chat, y'all. Fear of freedom, of which its possessor is not necessarily aware, makes him see ghosts. Such an individual is actually taking refuge in an attempt to achieve security, which he or she prefers to the risks of liberty. As Hegel testifies, it is solely by risking life that freedom is obtained. The individual who has not staked his or her life may, no doubt, be recognized as a person, but he or she has not attained the truth of this recognition as an independent self-consciousness. This is from Georg Hegel, The Phenomenology of Mind. One day I'll read Hegel. One day. It's a lot of work. Men and women rarely admit their fear of freedom openly, however, tending rather to camouflage it, sometimes unconsciously, by presenting themselves as defenders of freedom. They give their doubts and misgivings an air of profound sobriety, as befitting custodians of freedom. But they confuse freedom with the maintenance of the status quo, so that if Conscientization threatens to place that status quo in question, it thereby seems to constitute a threat to freedom itself. I feel like that makes sense. I feel like I won't explain too much, but yeah, safety, fear, right? Maintaining your safety at the expense of your own freedom, right? And this is what upholds systems. This is what upholds evil. Thought and study alone did not produce Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It is rooted in concrete situations and describes the reactions of laborers, peasants, or urban, and of middle-class persons, whom I have observed directly or indirectly during the course of my educative work. Continued observation will afford me an opportunity to modify or to corroborate in later studies the points proposed in this introductory work. Let me get a little water. Hegel is very dense, I hear. This volume will probably arouse negative reactions in a number of readers. Some will regard my position vis-a-vis the problem of human liberation as purely idealistic, or may even consider discussion of ontological vocation, love, dialogue, hope, humility, and sympathy as so much reactionary blah. Others will not, or will not wish to, accept my denunciation of a state of oppression that gratifies the oppressors. Accordingly, this admittedly tentative work is for radicals. I am certain that Christians and Marxists, though they may disagree with me in part or in whole, will continue reading to the end. But the reader who dogmatically assumes closed, irrational positions will reject the dialogue I hope this book will open. And this is a key thing too. It's dialogue, right? It's dialogue that we have to think about. From now on, everything we have to be, anytime we have to deal with communication, we need our communication to be dialogical. It has to involve dialectics. It has to involve thinking about holding different things together. It has to involve holding different perspectives together, understanding the other person, not just as an object, but understanding them as a subject like you, like yourself, right? Sectarianism fed by fanaticism is always castrating. Radicalization nourished by a critical spirit is always creative. Sectarianism mythicizes and thereby alienates. Radicalization criticizes and thereby liberates. Radicalization involves increased commitment to the position one has chosen, and thus ever greater engagement in the effort to transform concrete, objective reality. Conversely, sectarianism, because it is mythicizing and irrational, turns reality into a false and therefore unchangeable reality. So, this is like, yeah, sectarianism fed by fanaticism is always castrating. This is about this idea of perceiving things as static, perceiving things as dogmatic, right? Something is always true. It is always going to be true. Those who don't realize it's true are stupid, right? And in particular, like, there is no sort of way around what will happen. Let me be clearer. It is the idea of feeling you know the future and feeling you know people better than they know themselves. And this is something that I kind of touch on in a video that will be coming out later this month. Radicalization, nourished by a critical spirit, is always creative. It's always rebirthing. It's always creating, right? It's always progressing. We're always recognizing the changes. We're moving with the motion of the world around us, with the motion of ourselves in that world around us, as part of the world around us, right? We're thinking about things in motion. We're not pretending to be static. We're not pretending that it's always 7:55 p.m. Eastern time. But when it's 7:55 Eastern time, we act accordingly. But a sectarian will act like it's always going to be 7:55 Eastern time, and that will always mean a specific thing. And then so when it's 7:56 Eastern time, all of a sudden it's like, what does a sectarian do? Convince themselves that it's 7:55 Eastern time, right? It's not really that, because really, if you think about it, the time never changed, Sectarianism in any quarter is an obstacle to the emancipation of mankind. The rightist version thereof does not always, unfortunately, call forth its natural counterpart, radicalization of the revolutionary. Not infrequently, revolutionaries themselves become reactionary by falling into sectarianism in the process of responding to the sectarianism of the right. This possibility, however, should not lead the radical to become a docile pawn of the elites. Engaged in the process of liberation, he or she cannot remain passive in the face of the oppressor's violence. So Freire is saying, like, oftentimes people who try to be radical and revolutionary end up being sectarian. They end up being the people that are like, I am correct about this thing. It is always going to be this way. There is no more for me to learn. Because that is what they were responding to from the rights, from the conservatives. They feel that is the way to match fire with fire, perhaps. But ultimately, how does that make you much different from them, right? Like, you might be right about a lot more things, and you might do a lot more good, and that's good and should be noted. But ultimately, you will fall into the same trappings and the same cycles. But at the same time, the last thing you should take from this, Freire says, is that, well, trying to be radical is no point, right? I'm just gonna end up like another one of those radicals that ends up being, co-opted, or that ends up being sectarian, right? I have very little chance of becoming actually revolutionary, so I should just become a good pawn. I should just do the thing that I'm already doing. You should not. You should not be passive. You should always keep trying. Every moment is the moment, even if you've been fucking up your whole life. Each moment is the moment that you could stop fucking up, that you could decide, I'm going to try to stop fucking up, and that you could work to it and make real differences. On the other hand, the radical is never a subjectivist. For this individual, the subjective aspect exists only in relation to the objective aspect, the concrete reality, which is the object of analysis. Subjectivity and objectivity thus join in a dialectical unity, producing knowledge in solidarity with action and vice versa. For his or her part, the sectarian of whatever persuasion, blinded by irrationality, does not or cannot perceive the dynamic of reality, or else misinterprets it. Should this person think dialectically, it is with a domesticated dialectic. The rightist sectarian, whom I have previously termed a born sectarian, wants to slow down the historical process, to domesticate time, and thus to domesticate men and women. The note is that this is from his previous book. The leftist turned sectarian goes totally astray when he or she attempts to interpret reality and history dialectically and falls into essentially fatalistic positions. So this is real heady stuff, and it's not going to be possible for me to break down everything that's dense in this book to like audiences that are not super familiar with this topic and this writing. But I will be returning to these kinds of points as the book goes on. And what I'll say here in general is to look out for this, right? To think about this. Freire is constantly telling us to stop being sectarian. And we have to constantly be thinking about what it means to be sectarian. He calls the right-wing sectarian a domesticated, a born sectarian with a domesticated dialectic, right? If they think dialectically at all. The born sectarian is, I think, the term that he uses because he's saying that these people are just meant to be sectarian because they are right-wing. You know, not like, oh, you're just going to be sectarian. You're going to be a, bad thinker your whole life. But as long as you choose to be conservative and right-wing, as long as you choose to be somebody who thinks oppression is not real or is bad, or who thinks oppression is good, who thinks kings and tyrants are good, as long as you're a person who thinks like we should go back to the past when things were worse in certain regards, right? Whatever these kinds of, I'm being kind of polemical, of course, but the whole point of right-wing thought is we know what's good for people. We know how things will turn out if they act in a certain way that is different from what they are meant to act like. That's the whole thought of right-wing thinking. So it is born sectarian. And even if the person who is sectarian of any persuasion thinks dialectically, it's with a domesticated dialectic. So the right-wing sectarian wants to domesticate time and domesticate men and women. Let's slow down the historical process. Let's pretend that the changes that are happening in the world are not actually changing. They're not actually happening. Let's pretend that the world is the same way that it always was, and we just need to recognize that and go back to doing the things that we were doing before because they were working so much better. You want to domesticate time and domesticate men and women. We know the way that the world should be already. The idea that somebody's going to come along and be radical and say, no, we should change the way that we do things is in itself a problem. That's just like you don't even have to go over how that's sectarian, right? You don't even have to go over how that's entrapped thinking. That's static thinking. That's a person who's always living in 7:55 p.m. Eastern time. But the leftists turn sectarian, their domesticated dialectic, right, is that they're trying to interpret history and reality dialectically, but they fall into essentially fatalistic positions. And fatalistic, I don't think he means fatalistic just in terms of like everything will go bad, although that's a lot of what it is like, for instance, you could be one of those types of liberal leftists that thinks that trying to fight capitalism is ultimately a failing task that we should just avoid and just learn to work within the system. You could also be a kind of antiquated, tanky Marxist-Leninist that won't admit to the failings of the Soviet Union and thinks we just need to try to emulate the same things that the Soviet Union did in today's day and age, right? Ultimately, you're like leftist, but you're acting conservatively. You're thinking conservatively because you're thinking, I know what's going to happen in the future. I know what is best for people to do. And it is based in the things that were in the past that were better, right? And there's a very big difference between thinking dialectically about history and saying we can learn a lot from this. Let's study this. Let's pull from this, as we might do with something from Freire's time, right? And saying, let's just keep doing this revolution that they did in 1842. Let's keep doing the Haitian Revolution. Let's keep doing the French Revolution, right? Let's keep doing the Russian Revolution, right? regardless of your thoughts of any particular revolution, it is simply impossible to recreate those conditions in today's day and age. It is simply impossible to say we should just do exactly what they did and it'll be better. Even if you have great reason to say that, you're falling into a very dangerous path because you're choosing to live in a static realm of reality wherein everything is knowable and already known and already there. And there's no point in engaging with anything that seems new, that seems different, right? You're not engaging with the present conditions. That's sort of a lot of what I take from that. But it's, there's a lot more that you can take from that probably. Let me do a quick check of the chat. Quick check of the chat. I'm not a big fan of Deschooling Society by Ivan Illich, but it does have some bars. It does have some bars in it. Christianity is also fatalist. I would say it's a bit sectarian to say that Christianity is fatalist because Christianity can be interpreted in many different ways and has been interpreted in many different ways. And there are people who embody Christianity and study Christianity and practice Christianity in ways that are actually based on liberation. I mean, there's liberation theology, of which Freire is seen as a big thinker. So to say specifically like Christianity is fatalist might not be the best articulation. But I also generally kind of agree with you because as we know what Christianity is, and as we think about, for instance, this concept of everything going to get worse before the second coming of Christ, and knowing how people must act in terms of that, these are such commonalities. These are such common parts of like general Christian experience and theology, right? So those are some of my ideas there. A little water. The rightist sectarian differs from his or her leftist counterpart in that the former attempts to domesticate the present so that, he or she hopes, the future will reproduce this domesticated present, while the latter considers the future pre-established, a kind of inevitable fate, fortune, or destiny. For the rightist sectarian, today, linked to the past, is something given and immutable. For the leftist sectarian, tomorrow is decreed beforehand, is inexorably preordained. This rightist and this leftist are both reactionary because, starting from their respectively false views of history, both develop forms of action that negate freedom. The fact that one person imagines a well-behaved present and the other a predetermined future does not mean that they therefore fold their arms and become spectators, the former expecting that the present will continue, the latter waiting for the already known future to come to pass. On the contrary, closing themselves into circles of certainty from which they cannot escape, these individuals make their own truth. It is not the truth of men and women who struggle to build for the future, running the risks involved in this very construction. Nor is it the truth of men and women who fight side by side and learn together how to build this future, which is not something given to be received by people, but is rather something to be created by them. Both types of sectarian, treating history in an equally proprietary fashion, end up without the people, which is another way of being against them. Because you're either with the people or for the people, right? Or you're either with the people or against the people, I should say, right? So that builds on from what I was just talking about, and the well-behaved. I mean, there's a lot there. I gotta keep going. Whereas the rightist sectarian, closing himself in his truth, does no more than fulfill a natural role. The leftist who becomes sectarian and rigid negates his or her very nature. Each, however, as he revolves about his truth, feels threatened if that truth is questioned. Thus, each considers anything that is not his truth a lie. As the journalist Marcio Moreira Alves once told me, they both suffer from an absence of doubt. This is a great quote. They both suffering from an absence of doubt. Now, doubt is something that we can see as psychologically affecting people's ability to do things, right? That is a common sort of psychological articulation of the role of doubt. The more you doubt yourself, the less likely you'll do it. You need to stop doubting yourself, right? Dialectical thinking says you should feel and recognize the doubt that you have and use it to stay learning and open. It shouldn't stop you from acting, because then you'll just have been completely subsumed by your doubt. On the contrary, you should act and be energized to act, knowing that you're going to feel that doubt, knowing that that doubt is going to be there, and saying, this is important, actually. It's important that I have this doubt, right? So somebody who might be, sorry, I'm scratching my nose a lot. Somebody who might be really into working out a lot might be a zero doubt kind of guy, balls to the wall, push yourself against your limits, through your limits, never stop, and inherently start doing things that are like bad for them, that ultimately cause them to be like destroying their own bodies in a lot of ways. Whereas somebody who is enthusiastic about working out and wants to work out more might feel a lot of doubt, and rather than let that doubt stop them from going, say, let me use that doubt as my realm through which I can educate myself, my critical thinking. So that, for instance, when I work out and I feel something off in my body, I feel like I pushed my muscles a little too far, I can tell myself, hey, let me just stop. Where if my rest schedule might not be working as well as I think it is, I might experiment with that. Or, if I'm having some issue, I just can't seem to get to this next weight. Maybe I look at that doubt and say, okay, let me, I don't know, go on YouTube and see if there's something I can change with my form. Maybe I should walk away from it for a while and focus on different exercises, right? So this is the way we have to think about the world and about everything. We shouldn't suffer from an absence of doubt, because all that doubt is going to do is just keep piling up. And we're just going to have to keep mounting up more and more force to try to push it down. The radical, committed to human liberation, does not become the prisoner of a circle of certainty within which reality is also imprisoned. On the contrary, the more radical the person is, the more fully he or she enters into reality, so that, knowing it better, he or she can better transform it. This individual is not afraid to confront, to listen, to see the world unveiled. This person is not afraid to meet the people or to enter into dialogue with them. As long as theoretic, this is note 6, as long as theoretic knowledge remains the privilege of a handful of academicians in the party, the latter will face the danger of going astray. So that's, a big point of Freire's whole book is you have to be engaged in dialogue with the people. It can't just be that there's 5 smart guys in the room and they tell everybody what to do. It has to be that maybe there are 5 specialists in the room that give people information, but they don't tell people what to do. They actually learn from the people that they're giving information to help them with their own specialization, to improve them at their own specialization. That's an example of getting better at doing dialogue with people, right? This person does not consider himself or herself the proprietor of history or of all people, or the liberator of the oppressed. Sorry, I did like a half yawn there. That was weird. But he or she does commit himself or herself within history to fight at their side. The pedagogy of the oppressed, he said the thing. The pedagogy of the oppressed, the introductory outlines of which are presented in the following pages, is a task for radicals. It cannot be carried out by sectarians. I will be satisfied if among the readers of this work there are those sufficiently critical to correct mistakes and misunderstandings, to deepen affirmations, and to point out aspects I have not perceived. It is possible that some may question my right to discuss revolutionary cultural action, a subject of which I have no concrete experience. The fact that I have not personally participated in revolutionary action, however, does not negate the possibility of my reflecting on this theme. That's a pretty cool way of articulating that, as a person who also has not really participated in revolutionary action at all. Furthermore, in my experience as an educator with the people, using a dialogical and problem-posing education, I have accumulated a comparative wealth of material that challenged me to run the risk of making the affirmations contained in this work. From these pages, I hope at least the following will endure: my trust in the people, and my faith in men and women, and in the creation of a world in which it will be easier to love. And then here he just does a bunch of thanks, gratitudes. So I'll just read that really quickly. Here I would like to express my gratitude to Elsa, my wife and first reader, for the understanding and encouragement she has shown my work, which belongs to her as well. I would also like to extend my thanks to a group of friends for their comments on my manuscript. At the risk of omitting some names, I must mention Jean de Vega Coutinho, Richard Shaw, Jim Lamb, Myra and Jovelino Ramos, Paulo Gitarso, Almino Alfonso, Plinio Sampaio, Hernani Maria Fiori, Marcela Gajardo, Jose Luis Fiori, and Jean Saccariotti. The responsibility for the affirmations made herein is, of course, mine alone. Pedagogy of the Oppressed. We've just read the foreword and preface of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Thoughts? It's very anti-Christian to allow and listen to your doubts. Often sermons are about denouncing doubt. Yeah, always be wary of that. You know, and I have friends that can speak to that, and speak to even ways in which they'll hint at, deconstructing your religion, deconstructing Christianity, thinking deeply, thinking critically about Christianity. But in reality, it's like, think critically about Christianity so that you can figure out why it's right? Why we're teaching it right, why the Bible is exactly as we teach it. Think critically so that you can agree with us. It's not think critically so that you can disagree with us in ways that might be really important and good. And that's the point. You got to encourage people to do things like that. You got to encourage people to challenge your thought, right? How much better are you going to get as a thinker if you are not challenging your own thought? And if you are not encouraging the people around you to challenge your thought? And this is a huge problem with leftists in the West, especially. Let me not get too far into that. And it's no coincidence that these social media apps owned by billionaires that love to sow discord among the people, for profit. It's no coincidence that that's part of what's fueling people to be so sectarian about a lot of things. To the point where you have people talking about you have to work out or you're a bad leftist and shit like that. But that's just a conversation for a different day. What is revolutionary action? It's a big question. For now, what I'll say in terms of what I think he means that he hasn't participated in revolutionary action is that he hasn't participated in some type of noted struggle to cause a revolution in a country, in a place, like an armed struggle, like a Cuban Revolution kind of thing, right? My daughter called, so I'll have to watch the upload again later, but I love these readings. I really do. Thank you, Moni. Can revolutionary action be mutual aid or direct action or personal change? I don't know. I'm thinking, is this about how accessibility... is this about how accessibility or choice is revolutionary action? So, deep question. I think the big point of what's great about this book is that Freire's reflection, Freire posits that if you are doing something with a real dialectical, liberation approach, that many things can be revolutionary action, including being a teacher. Because if you're a teacher that is inciting for people to change the status quo and challenging them to engage with their critical consciousness and do things that change the status quo, that's revolutionary in a lot of ways, right? That's revolutionary. Especially if that's what you're willing to do, like that's what you're trying to do, and that's what they're picking up, right? And they're doing real change, right? That's the type of shit that will make somebody like Paulo Freire, even though he doesn't pick up a gun and shoot anybody, makes him the target of so much ire, the target of so much criticism, the target of so much reactionary fear-mongering. Because the way that he posits his thoughts and the things that he does to change education philosophy is dangerous to the status quo. It is dangerous to the oppressor, right? And dangerous to them specifically in a way that he's going to posit, that he's going to talk about really well, specifically in a way where that contradiction is at risk. And the oppressor needs that contradiction. That contradiction of what? The contradiction of oppressor versus oppressed. Needs that contradiction to remain in place so that they can remain oppressors. Right? Right now, it's furthering the class consciousness of the working class. That can be something that's revolutionary action. The point is more so anything can be and cannot be, and anything is and also isn't enough. You know what I mean? Have you read Leila Gonzalez? She's a fundamental author that should be taught and read a lot more, I hear. I haven't, but I'm interested. Yes. Leila Gonzalez. Okay, sorry. Feeling conscientiousness-atized. Thank you, Il. Very glad. Okay, so that's been this edition of the Paulo Freire Pedagogy of the Oppressed live reading live stream. We will be back at some point soon to read chapter 1. When will I come back? I don't know. You'll see me when you see me. You know, maybe tomorrow morning, maybe tomorrow night, maybe Saturday. Who knows? But as will be the case with this stream, the live streams will be uploaded to the Reading with Elliot channel, which I will share in the community posts of this channel. So thanks. See you all. Thank you so much for your work today, for listening, for reading, for thinking. And I look forward to doing this more often. Goodbye.